Well, thank you for having me. That's the first thing I'd like to say to Dario for keeping the meetup going, pivoting it to be a virtual meetup. These are the weirdest fucking times any of us have probably lived in. Unless there's anybody on the call who was born and lived through the Spanish flu, I reckon this is about as weird as it gets. So thank you to Dario for sticking with this and trying to create something that, you know, a forum where we could all come together. And thank you to Megan for coming on and to Oliver for supporting in those efforts. I guess we're all trying to make things as normal as possible. As I just said, let me put myself into full screen. This was the new London Microservices Twitter handle. So if those people on the call would like to follow it, I think Dario would be happy. Megan started the meetup by saying she has a new initiative. It's about connecting members of the community to other people and working out which meetups are best to go to. You can go and register there. I did register, so well done to Megan and the team. And then I could start my talk. So it's very nice to meet everybody. My name is Jamie Dobson. I work for a company called Container Solutions. We do some microservices. This talk is actually more about cloud migration, or it's actually more about cloud native or transforming your organization to a cloud native organization. And I did the first version of this talk about a year ago at the microservices meetup. And I said to Dario, look, it's not very technical at all. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. It's nice to have a sort of a mixture of talks. And at the time, we were writing a book about this. And the meetup that evening was not very polished. It was a bit rough and ready, but nevertheless, I got some great feedback. And all of that feedback went into what happened next, which was the completion of the book, the completion of the pattern language, etc., etc. And so for me to be speaking again in this meetup essentially closes the chapter on what was a 12 or 14-month project. So in that sense, there's personal significance for me to be back here talking about this stuff. Now, I can't see you because I'm in full screen mode. So if you've got questions, stick them in the long day, fucking long day. Stick them in the chat, and then Dario can shout them out. Alternatively, we can get to the questions at the end of the talk. Okay, a few things. The design or the cloud native transformation patterns that we talk about in this meetup or in this presentation, you can download them or you can grab a free copy following that link over there. This is not the most important call to action. This one is probably a little bit more interesting. Container Solutions, the company where I work, take psychological safety and mental well-being very seriously. We have a team of occupational psychologists on staff, and what they did immediately was write some guidelines for how to stay safe and stay sane during the COVID quarantine. The guidelines were so good, we released them publicly, and you can download them by following the QR code there on the left. You do not have to put your email address in. We will not drop cookies on your browser. You will not enter the marketing machine. These are free to download, released as open source if you want to change them and use them within your organization. And I'm very proud that Container Solutions have done this, and I'm very proud that these guidelines have been shared and used extensively within the community. Final call to action, and I promise this is the very last promotion. 5 years ago, we started a conference called Software Circus. It was absolutely amazing. Maybe some people on the call were there at the initial one. We're going to do a virtual one in about 3 weeks. As soon as we announce this, some of the leading members of our community, Adrian Cockcroft, Kelsey Hightower, Luke Marsden, Ken Owens, a whole bunch of people said they were going to come and speak. All of them will speak for free. It's an amazing community event. If you want to come and grab more content, you know, that's similar to this evening's content, then please come along. As I said, totally free. The registration form is so easy. It's your name and your email address, and that's it. And by the way, I can hear Slack peeping in the background, so I'm just going to kill Slack there. Okay, so those were the calls to actions. Finished. Now, on to the talk. What are we going to discuss this evening? WealthGrid and the classic mistakes. WealthGrid is a financial company. I'm going to take a sip of my beer. WealthGrid is a fictional company that is collected from all the different customers that Container Solutions have helped. WealthGrid make a number of classic mistakes before they get their cloud native transformation right. One of the ways they get it right is by using the patterns in our pattern language for cloud native transformation. This is the work that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is how do you design a transformation? If you want to go cloud native, or if you're in the middle of becoming cloud native, what are the things you can do to design the actions for your next steps? That's what tonight's going to be about. We like to quote Tolstoy, all great literature is one of 2 stories. A man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. In the case of Cloud Native and WealthGrid, a stranger is coming to town. So, who are WealthGrid? Well, they're probably in the City of London. It's a successful mid-sized financial firm. They say they do agile because they use Jira and they visualize their work in Kanban boards. This doesn't make them agile. They think they're agile. They're probably agile-ish or waterfall-ish. WealthGrid is led by Steve, the CEO, technical manager Jenny, and of course, a bunch of engineers. Steve cares about all the things that executives care about: revenue, margins, driving costs down. But in the last year or so, Steve has become very interested in time to value. He's not stupid. He sees what Starling Bank are doing. He sees what Netflix are doing. And he thinks, or he understands, if we can get features to our customers quicker, then we can monetize them. The engineers, of course, are interested in cloud native, Kubernetes, public cloud. They also know for their own careers, this stuff's interesting. Now, Jenny is in between the groups. She understands what Steve needs, time to value, but it's not a magic wave of the wand, right? Let's get to market quicker. She understands that Steve's ambition needs to match the organizational capability. And her organization is currently not capable. So Jenny has to modulate between the capabilities of the engineers and the demands of the executive team. This is WealthGrid. Happy place, nice place to work, good salaries. But the stranger is coming. The stranger typically comes in 3 forms. The first one is the incumbent. This is the dominant player in your space who decides to move early with cloud native and cloud native technologies. The best example of this is ING Bank. In the Netherlands 10, 12 years ago, they knew what everybody knew, that they could be disrupted, that they would gain competitive advantage if they went digital. But ING did the one thing nobody else did. They acted on their insights. By doing that, they did 2 things. They won the war for users, so they captured the Dutch and Belgian market, and they won the war for talent. Now, fast forward a few years, and all the other banks in the Netherlands, SNS, Rabobank, ABN AMRO, they're too far behind. They can't catch up. So essentially, ING have captured that market. If you're operating in a space where there's a strong incumbent and they move before you, you are going to lose that race. And once you've lost it, you're going to struggle to play catch up. The other type of stranger is the disruptor. So this I find to be a pretty amazing slide. I stole this slide from Greg Hawkins. He was the CTO of Starling Bank. If you look on the timeline on the left, you've got $70 million raised, and they start to build January 2016. Fast forward to February 2017, and they've already launched their beta testing program. So they can do, or they did in 1 year, what most companies out there couldn't do in 10 years. So if you're operating in a space, a safe, conservative space, and a stranger comes to town that's a challenger, they may take you over, and they may do it very, very quickly. Starling didn't have the legacy. What they had was a strong vision They had access to cloud native technologies, and that let them go extremely quickly. And of course, the third type of stranger would be the big Silicon Valley firms themselves. Well, actually, Amazon's not from, it's not from Silicon Valley, but you know what I mean. Amazon has got a banking license. They just don't know what to do with it. So it's always an interesting question. What happens if somebody moves into your space? And actually, these competitors are the ones you don't see coming. So clearly, if there's a strong incumbent, you're going to fight them. Clearly, if there's these challenges coming up, they're gonna want to eat your breakfast. But if you think about Kodak and Fujifilm, it wasn't Fuji who killed Kodak. It was WhatsApp and Facebook and digital media. And that's because those organizations served the underlying need to swap photographs of your kids with the kids' grandparents. So the competitors or the threat that you don't see coming is often the one that wipes you out. This means Jenny's not stupid. She knows about these three different types of threat. So this is the first wake-up call that she receives. So what does Jenny do? Now this might feel painfully familiar. And if anybody's got any questions or comments, please shout them out or unmute yourself and ask or put it in the chat. What does Jenny do? Well, she's like, well, cloud native is like, it's Amazon, right? It's public cloud and it's Kubernetes and it's microservices. We don't need to speak to management about this. This is what we do. I'm a technical manager and my technical team know how to do this stuff. So therefore she chucks a load of stuff up onto the backlog and begins to migrate Wealth Grid towards cloud native. 6 to 12 months later, nothing's really happened. She hasn't made much progress with the cloud native platform, and actually some of the features she was meant to deliver have got stuck, and that's because they spent a lot of time working on the cloud native stuff. Okay, second wake-up call. Okay, that was not as easy as I thought it was going to be. So now what happens? Well, Jenny needs to speak to Steve. Steve, you may recall, was the CEO. This time, Jenny's like, yeah, I kind of fucked up that. I kind of fucked up that set of features. Now, Steve's not a dick. Steve's a nice guy. He understands engineering's about experimentation. He understands that things go wrong. It's a reasonably psychologically safe place to work. So Jenny doesn't get roasted, but they start to discuss this. They come up with a plan together, engineering, Jenny and Steve, and then they get the approval. And then they start again, the second attempt at becoming cloud native. If you're on the call right now and you're on your third, fourth or fifth attempt, don't feel bad. This is completely normal. So off she goes again. And what does she do this time? So this time we split our engineering capacity into two. A number of people continue on the application delivery that they were doing anyway, the new features for the customers, but a bunch of people join the cloud native platform team. They're trying to set up the tools, they're helping put some of their applications in microservices, they're usually choosing stateless ones, and they're chucking them up on the cloud. But it doesn't work. 6 months pass, 12 months pass, 18 months pass. And all of a sudden, it's gone wrong for the second time. I'm just going to close that door. Okay. Why is this so difficult? Well, Jenny and Steve and the group have never done cloud native before. They underestimate just how difficult it is. So this is more or less their mental model. They probably have a number of tightly coupled monoliths, or they have some client server applications. If they work in finance, the client server applications would have come from mobile devices, mobile applications, desktop applications, and possibly web apps. And when you start to put lots of different faces onto your monoliths, you tend to start cutting things up into the client server architecture. So in their minds, they're thinking, we're nearly there, right? Because what's cloud native? It's just microservices, and you chuck them in a container and you throw them on the cloud. So this is a key problem or key missing of excuse me, it's a poor assumption of theirs. So they think it's about technology, microservices, automated operations using Kubernetes, and the public cloud. In other words, they think cloud native is about technology, only about technology. And of course, everybody in this call knows they're wrong. This is the actual model for what cloud native is. There are 9 key dimensions, give or take, right? We understand this is a model, and you know what they say. All models are wrong, some are useful. We have found this particular model to be very useful. So if you start at the top, what is cloud native? One of the things it is it enables the open source software development methodology to be used within a large organization. So, for example, we mentioned ING Bank earlier. Teams that look after one or a collection of microservices communicate to each other through pull requests on each other's Git repositories, or by logging issues in each other's issue tracking software. If one team is waiting for something and you're not providing it, they might pull your repository, create a patch, and then submit a pull request. And if your team's happy with it, they will accept it. So the superpower of cloud native is it lets you bring the most powerful software development method we've ever seen, open source, within your own organization. Clearly, if you're doing agile or hierarchical agile, where you need a change from a team over there, so you put it on your backlog and it gets escalated to the scrum of scrums of scrum of scrum of scrums, and then comes all the way down. Should that team prioritize it? Well, you might get that feature back in 12 weeks if they prioritized it. This question? I thought a question was coming because I heard rustling. So this is the mistake that WealthGrid made. And if we continue down the maturity matrix, what else does cloud native enable? Well, data-driven product design, right? So we listen, we use A/B testing, we use canary releases to understand what users are doing. So you're only going to get the benefit of all of this technology if you have the accompanying organizational changes. So this was the mistake that they made. Typically, it looks something like this. People experiment with a container, they get their credit card out, they grab a virtual machine on Amazon or Google Cloud, and they start to make that transition to cloud native. They use Compose, Docker Compose, or nowadays it would probably be Minikube, to start to understand the technology, and they think they see what needs to come next. And it's at this point that cloud native transformation gets full approval by management. This was the mistake that they made earlier, Steve and Jenny. Full approval and a full plan. But of course, once you get into large scale production systems, the complexity absolutely flies through the roof. So people underestimate just how difficult this is. This is when the oh no moment happens. Okay, now we're in trouble. Paul Jenny is like third time lucky, right? Steve's like, we've got to do this, right? What are we doing? We've wasted now 24 months on this, and God knows how much money. We have to make this work. Jenny's third wake-up call. Now what does she do? She doesn't start to act. She actually starts to read, to visit conferences, and if she goes to the right conferences or she comes to this meetup group, she will learn what actually this cloud native stuff and this microservice stuff is actually really fucking difficult, right? So she starts to read. She may have read my book. This is the book that we wrote. It's all of our patterns collected together. But if she didn't read the book, she would have discovered all these different patterns on her own. So let's take a quick time out from Jenny. We've seen what she's done. She's made 2 classic mistakes, and now she's started to investigate the landscape, and she's learning about these things that work and these things that don't work. At Container Solutions, we call them patterns. Let's discuss what these cloud native transformation patterns look like. Well, what is a pattern? Well, a pattern is a collection of design decisions. This is very important. Design decisions. For example, a pattern, if you're thinking about furniture, is like a word in a dictionary. Table, chair, sofa. Here is an example. Here are 3 examples of tables on the left-hand side. Now, what's interesting about these tables is they're very clearly tables, very clearly, right? Nobody would think these things were chairs or beds or anything like that. This is the power of pattern languages. They have the ability to make things really different and really unique, and at the same time, sort of samey. So a pattern is like a word in a dictionary. When you collect those words together, they become a language. In this case, it's a furniture language. And then you use stories or sentences to do design. Square table with 4 chairs and a sofa in a room. So the magic trick of these design patterns is that they can make things look extremely different and extremely similar all at the same time. So for example, actually, I can look out my window. You're walking through London, all the streets of Rome, all the streets of Amsterdam, and all those streets have got unique houses. Every house is different, and yet they look remarkably similar. That's what design patterns do. They make things seem different and similar all at the same time. If you look at the Financial Times, lots of really good stuff online about how they went cloud native. If you look at Starling Bank, how they use cloud native, they're very different case studies, and yet they're also very similar. This is what design patterns do. Well, what is the cloud native transformation pattern language? Right? That's a fair question. What is this pattern language that we came up with? Well, these are patterns that help you successfully migrate to cloud native. They're a collection of design decisions, and importantly, they're context specific. Context specific, right? So the original creator of design patterns was about architecture, and he talked about waiting areas, and he gave an example of a bus stop. A bus stop is a waiting area, but the context in which you use it is on the street. If you put a bus stop in a hospital waiting room, it is a waiting area, it's a pattern, but it's not the right context. And the problem, the reason context is so important is because a lot of people go out there to conferences and they copy what Netflix is doing, or they copy what Starling Bank are doing, but the context is different. And this is why the cloud native transformations fail. So design patterns are very importantly context specific. Let's take a look at an example. I think this is a good moment to say, well, okay, this is all very interesting, but what specifically does a pattern look like? Well, patterns have to be easy to parse. They have to be easy to read. What we're trying to do with patterns is connect the knowledge and expertise of experts with so-called normal people in an office, on the street, if it's architecture, etc., etc. The only way you're going to package that knowledge up and make it usable is by having a very strict structure. So all patterns have got a definition. What is this thing? The context in which it operates, therefore, consequently, and at the very end, related patterns. So let me come out of full screen mode for one moment, and I will move across to the patterns repository that we built in conjunction with the book. I can drop the URL in later. So here you see the title, the business case. A very brief explanation as to what the business case is, and then the context in which this will work. So this is very important, the context bit. And then therefore, this is what's going to happen. So in this case, the context is something like, cloud native transformations are a big commitment, requiring significant investment of budget. You should invest in a business case. And then consequently, the business case will be clear you are prepared to allocate the necessary budget and resources that such a large project will require. And the patterns themselves are broken up into these 4 categories: strategy and risk reduction, organization, development and design, infrastructure and cloud. This will give you an insight into just how large this pattern language is and just how difficult it is to succeed with a cloud native transformation. There's about 100 patterns and counting. So let me put myself back into full screen mode. What happened so far? Let's return to Wealth Grid. On the first attempt, Jenny tried to attach cloud, Kubernetes, and microservices into their business as usual work streams. So this was picked up by the teams that are very proficient in what they do, but are not necessarily super creative, not necessarily super innovative. Later, we went into the full rewrite mode, and this time there was a reversal. Lots of creative people from the team joined the platform team, tried to get their heads around cloud native, but in doing that, business as usual was neglected, and all the features that people were trying to create sort of dried up. What happened once Jenny started to understand what cloud native was and what strategy was? This is what she did. Steve had already committed to this project. That's one of our cloud native transformation patterns. There was no business case and there was no transformation champion. So after studying this stuff and finding out what other people were doing, Jenny and Steve decided to start with these 3 patterns. Once they had started to get moving, the focus was vision first, build a core team. And based on the vision, what they were trying to do at Wealth Grid, and based on what the core team wanted, the transformation strategy started to emerge. At this point, I will say every transformation is different because your context is different. But every successful transformation that we've seen has got all of these elements in it. Now, what happens next depends on where you work. What happened at Wealth Grid was they used the separate proficiency and creativity pattern. Down on the creativity side of things, they were doing proof of concepts, MVPs, exploratory experiments. Now, what that led to in the proficient stream, in the application development stream, what that led to was those teams getting ready to onboard onto this cloud native platform. That would have involved learning about
unhappy customers, they're leaving lots of ratings for that kind of granularity to make sense. But now we've actually pulled that information out. And it breaks it down by window. This is obviously, you can see it's test data. So you can see at 1 minute past 6, this user here, they left 10 ratings. Let's go to the bottom here.
Yeah, I think we have to.
I've done it. Doesn't matter. That's just an accident. Somebody left their mic on, which does happen. Okay, where was I? So in the transformation at Wealth Grid, then the proficiency teams were focusing on learning about Docker and preparing to onboard onto the cloud platform. This is a very, very interesting point. Some companies are completely bonkers. They want to go overnight onto the cloud platform, get everything up there. This is very stupid. By doing gradual onboarding, every time you onboard a new application to your cloud platform, every time you strangle a monolith, break it up into microservices, you learn something. Every time you learn something, you reduce the risk. So if you take a look in our book or on our website, Adidas appears as a case study, and they gradually onboarded their applications, and they started their efforts in Finland, not because they had anything against the Finnish, but commercially it was a smaller market. So the risk was reduced. And then we start to think about strangling those remaining monoliths. And at the end, we lift and shift at the end in Wealth Grid's case. And in fact, many successful cloud native transformations start to lift and shift the remaining monoliths at the end of the work, not at the beginning. This is a very common pattern. People grabbing their credit card, chucking an application in a container and throwing it on Amazon and then running around telling all their friends, oh, we're cloud native now. We've moved to the cloud. But we can see that that's a ridiculous statement. It's pure vanity. Cloud native is 9 dimensions. And if you haven't got all of them, you're not really taking advantage of this amazing technology. So if any of your bosses are running around saying, oh, we've moved to the cloud, just because they've put one application up there, you want to call bullshit on that, right? This type of vanity nonsense is really not very helpful. Yeah, so I think I've said enough on that. Okay, so this, in the end, was the final transformation strategy for WealthGrid. Of course, you can only know in hindsight what it looks like. You can't really prepare all of this in advance. The strategy emerges over time. You choose the patterns that are fit for your context at any given moment. More recently, we have collected these patterns onto these cards. There's a visual cue on the card and a summary. What this does is it allows our customers to reason about effects. So we were working with a team the other week, nice team, and they looked at the core team pattern. So they threw it on the table. We talked about this. We said, do you have anybody with experience of distributed system development? If you do, if you don't, and they didn't, do you have the right hiring procedures? And just by putting the card on the table, we were able to work backwards and work out we needed to look at the hiring procedures, we needed to look at job descriptions. So the cards, the patterns, when they're collected like this, let us reason about effects. This is strategy in a nutshell. We don't worry about the details, we worry about the actions we can take next. So Jenny didn't have these cards, but if there was a different Jenny who was moving to cloud native now, she could grab a set of these from our website. They're very, very useful, very, very powerful tool. One more thing, culture. In my opinion, you shouldn't listen to all these consultancies who tell you your culture is broken, your culture is wrong, right? If that was true, how come your culture has created these amazing businesses and these amazing systems? Legacy systems generate all of our revenue. They keep us all in work. Cloud native is just a nice natural progression. Culture is a function of what we do. It's very simple. As we move to cloud native, we will realize psychological safety is key. No psychological safety, no cloud native. That's because we need to take risks. We need to try things. We need to push decision-making closest to the action as possible. Each of these culture patterns will help you to do that. You don't need to change your team. The team at WealthGrid started the transformation and ended it. All of our customers are just normal, nice people. They've got families, they've got dogs, some of them play tennis, right? You don't need to be some sort of rock stars to succeed with this stuff. So you should disabuse yourself of that notion. These cultural patterns will help you. Over time, you will become a nicer culture, because without these, you can't succeed with the cloud native technologies. And this, of course, is the magic trick. At the end of the transformation, they had not gone cloud native. What WealthGrid actually had was a whole system of innovation. They were able to produce digital product after digital product without consultants, without any help from the cloud providers. They got the balance dead right between proficiency, somewhere in the region of 80%, and innovation. And ultimately, that's what cloud native really is, a social technology with actual technologies in there, leadership, transformational management, design thinking, and data-driven product design. And as soon as a company gets this, they can continue to dominate their own industries and consistently produce competitive advantage. So the stranger is coming. Now the question is, are we all ready? Thank you very much for listening. And the cards are available on the website if you wanted to grab a deck.
Thank you, Jamie. Anybody has any questions? I haven't seen any in the chat. So I'm gonna wait a bit till the people time to type. Or if anybody wants to speak out.
I hope I'm not the only one drinking.
How difficult is it for culture adoption?
Let me check. What's the question?
Is there resistance from people? Can you see the...
Sure. Look, yes, there's resistance, and in many ways for good reason. Executives are terrible, right? They go off to a conference, and 10 years ago they said we're going to do agile, and then 5 years ago they said we were going to do OpenStack, and then they come back and say now we're going to do cloud native, and everybody is like, oh my god, we're so fed up. By the way, I'm going to stop presenting now because unless I need my slides again. So people naturally resist the temptation to follow these executives who seem to do their stuff in a way that doesn't make any sense. That being said, and that's why the executive commitment and the business case is so important. So for example, let's go back to ING Bank. They said, we're going to go, they called it DevOps back then. We're going to use automation and transformational leadership. And of course, the whole of ING would have gone, whatever, right? Sure, you're going to do that. That's what you were going to do with Agile. But then the CIO, a guy called Ron von Kemenade, he's blind actually. So, he'd never programmed before. He's a businessman. He taught himself Java. So imagine learning to program without your sight. And he said, I've done that in order to try to make a connection with the engineers. The other people involved in the transformation were doing similar things. Coming to the shop floor, taking the ties off, we're in this together. They brought in speakers from Spotify, they brought in container solutions at one point. At that point, that's how you deal with resistance. So when people say our executives are committed, the people making decisions are committed, the resistance starts to fall away. So cloud native is very useful for changing the culture, because if you don't change the way you work, you can't succeed with it. And completely in reverse, when you change your culture, cloud native is a natural next step. Without executive commitment, you will not succeed. This is an all-encompassing, immense effort. It's essentially taking where you work and making it a bit like Google. If your executives are not on board, the resistance will stay, and in my opinion, for good reason. Does that answer your question? That was from Shivani. Does that answer your question? I will take your silence as a yes, so that's fine.
Yes.
Any other questions?
One more question for Darren. How can you ensure you've hired the right people for roles where you don't currently have expertise of in the team?
Is that correct? How can you
hiring someone that you don't have expertise of?
When you don't currently have, well, this is a good question. Now let me pause for a moment. Well, this requires a bit of answering. So first of all, at Container Solutions, we very much think we're cloud native. Well, we should be. We don't hire for skills. We hire for values. So if you go into Google and look at Starling Bank, they've got some great talks, and they had a very strict set of values about scalability and resilience. So clearly, if you've never built a distributed system, then it's hard for you to test somebody. What is do you know about container? Do you know about scaling? But you do know about your values. 80-90% of the hiring process is getting a values match. Does this person's value system match what our values are at this place? And does this person have a capacity to grow? These are the two most important questions. Now, when it comes to the technical interview, I don't know what to say. We help our customers. They ask me the same question. So I say to them, look, you hire for values, right? And they go, yeah, good. And you hire for growth potential, right? And they go, yeah, definitely. And so we say, fine. The only thing you're missing is the technical interview. We can join that technical interview. We can help you write the job specs. We can interview the people, and we can check them out. So I guess my answer to the question is find somebody who does know what they're doing, right? And then you should be able to do the technical interview. But if you focus on technical capabilities instead of people's value system, you'll destroy your transformation anyway. What is the best way to make execs understand the point you just made about cloud native? Oh, sorry, excuse me, Dario. Before we go to Hamad's question, Darren, did that answer your question? You guess, smiley face. Okay, fine. There's some good blogs on the Container Solutions website about that. I've only had, I swear to God, this tin is nearly full. I only had one other beer, but I've got children. So one beer and I'm starting to get drunk. So if I remember, I will share you some links. So Hamed, how do you make execs understand the point you just made on cloud native? There is no best way to make them understand. If they don't understand this, I don't fucking care. Their job is to understand their business and competitive advantage. If you're an engineer who needs to convince his boss of the importance of cloud native, right, which is like convincing them of the importance of having a clean toilet and running water, you should find a different job. It's their job to understand competitive advantage and their job to understand the technical landscape. Alternatively, you could wait for a global pandemic to just slap them round the face a little bit, and all of a sudden, they might start to think seriously about remote work and cloud native technology. Now, that was my very bitchy, disgusting answer. I was not being very constructive. What you could also do is give them our book. And so our book has landed on the desks of a number of executives. They were like, what is this cloud stuff? And engineers have given them the book. And actually they've gone, oh shit. Oh God, I did that. Oh fuck. And so the book is meant to help middle managers engage in a sensible discussion with their executives. If your executive's a complete nutcase, then definitely get a new job. So maybe give them the book, see how they respond, and if they're idiots, whatever. Come and work for us. All right. Any more?
There is one more question.
Right.
Your strategy work independent of complexity of adoption within specific cloud providers, as there is no standardization as such, and rate of change of features layout is different from each.
The patterns are completely independent of underlying technologies. Public cloud is one pattern, only one pattern from 100. So design patterns help you with your thinking, but they won't do your thinking for you. So you definitely need to look at them, pop through the book or download the cards and try to understand what works for your context. They won't give you specific architectural hints and tips. Okay, Connor Reed has a question. Thank you, Connor. Cool name, by the way, Connor Reed. Really appreciate the time. I'm interested about how do you preserve culture during times like the pandemic, and what is Container Solutions doing in this regard? This is a difficult question. Let me see if I can pop up a visual aid. So Connor, imagine a matrix, a 2x2 matrix, and on one axis you've got financial health, and on the other is cultural health. But in strategy, you can make moves, you can take options. Slashing your workforce is an option you can take that will preserve your financial health, but destroy your culture and productivity. All executives understand the trade-offs between preserving your culture and preserving your financial health. Container Solutions has a strong culture. There's no fucking way we would optimize financial health over our cultural health. So what we do is focus on cultural moves. So for example, we would say if we need to save costs and reduce salaries, we will reduce salaries across the company, right? we would not fire one team and therefore let the other 60% of the people maintain their house families. That's not how we do it. So you need to look at, your executives and your leaders need to look at what we call culture preserving moves. They may make mistakes, they may panic, they may have paid out tons of dividends and have no cash left. So, I mean, the short answer to the question is you preserve your culture by not hacking away at it, but if you've made previously poor decisions that's put you in a financially difficult position, it's going to be difficult. So, and at Container Solutions, we don't pay dividends as a rule, we keep our cash, and when we have crises like this pandemic, we focus on what can we do to preserve the culture. And we do things like sharing salaries, sharing the salary burden. We might be able to give equity to people who've taken a pay cut, things like that. All right. I hope that answers your question. James Mottram, what if you start the transformation and the money to transform gets taken away, the focus to keep the lights on? Yeah, that's a good question. Part of me wants to think, transformation should pay for itself, because with these patterns, you go very slowly until you go quickly. At the same time, you can understand a number of customers of ours did say, look, we can't do this cloud native stuff now. It's too expensive. And of course, we said, well, what are you talking about? The work we do in April will save you money in May. Some of our customers cancelled for political reasons. They're like, hey, we've got to be looked to be saving costs and you're an external. Some of our customers actually said, you know what, you're right. If we do this right now, we're going to be able to preserve, save money in the future. So these decisions to save money are often political. It's about looking to be saving costs, and sometimes that does happen. But if you keep in contact with your customers, try to be as open with them as you can be, they might come back around again in the next few weeks or few months. We need to let Jamie back in the future. Oh, thank you, Hamad. That's very nice to say. Thank you, Filippo. It was good to have. It's always a real pleasure for me. As I said, I have a strong emotional connection to this meetup, so I genuinely good to be back. And again, thanks, Dario, for having me.